What's up, everybody? Happy Friday. It is beautiful day out. The sun is out, the sun is shining, the sky is blue, and it's a great day to talk about fear. So I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the productive ways in which we can try to get over our fears, and this comes really from my experience in doing so. So you know, a lot of times when we experience that fear, it could be very small or it could be very intense. The small fears are things or the very deceptive or tiny fears that kind of go into our heads, or sometimes the ones where we say, I could never do something like that. Where we see somebody doing something extreme, and we say, I can never do that. Or it may be something that is that causes us undue stress, like a confrontation we need to have with another person, or a difficult conversation, or something along those lines, where it just weighs on us very heavily, and we get anxious about it. And there's ways to do that safely, to overcome those things, instead of going full bore into just panic mode. And part of the way, and really one of the only ways to get through a lot of those fears, is by immersion. It's Again, I want to emphasize that for anxiety, or people with anxiety, it's never something we really get over. It just doesn't end one day because we find the secret sauce to getting over our anxieties or our fears. We transcend it. We rise above it. We realize that it's not a monster that is going to destroy us. We realize that the fear and the anxiety, it can't hurt us. That fear is really just an emotion, just like anything else, and it's there to protect us. And for many of us, it just gets overwhelming, and sometimes it's magnified in a lot of ways, irrationally. But once we can recognize that irrationality and start to work through it, we can rise above it and proceed anyway. There's one of the favorite mantras I like to say is something that Tony Robbins has said in some of his seminars, and that's just, I don't negotiate with my brain. In fact, he says, I don't negotiate with my effing brain, but keep it clean for the children on here. And I think that's valuable, is when we're faced with something that is limiting us, that we can say, I'm not negotiating with my brain. I'm just going to go and just go. And a good example of that is with with like an ice bath or a cold immersion. We've been practicing. Our family's been practicing with those for a couple of years now, through the Wim Hof method, which has been a great program to help with anxiety and energy and things like that. But the cold immersion is something, when you look at a bath that's filled with ice and it's going to be freezing cold, your first instinct is saying, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. But in reality, the reality of it is completely safe. So forcing ourselves into the situation of just getting in and going through that, it's the perfect resource to actually rise above and go through, experience the immediate fear, and then immediately get over it, or rise above it, to just immerse yourself in it. And you immediately feel better afterwards. So that creates a point of reference. So that's an example of literal and figurative immersion in this, into what we might be afraid of. And I think so when you experience a particular fear or a phobia or something of that kind, and I have many, I've had many in my life, I think it's important to ask yourself the question, because some fears we don't really want to get over or need to get over. For example, I have a fear of heights. Now, sometimes that can be limiting, but I also have to ask myself the question, why do I need to get into an airplane and fly 10,000 feet into the sky and jump out of it to get over that fear? That doesn't seem logical to me. So it's a fear that doesn't necessarily limit me right now. I can still get in an airplane. I can still climb a ladder to put Christmas lights up or things like that. But it hasn't limited me in any way, and I don't feel a nudge or a spiritual pull to get over that fear. So it's not that important to actually, to me to actually get into a plane and jump out of it or anything like that. So one of the first questions to ask when you're looking at that is is this fear limiting me in some way? When you experience something, or when you see, when you are experiencing a fear, and your immediate reaction is, I can never do that, or I can't approach that, or I can't do this, or no way, I'm backing off. If you stop and ask yourself, how is this fear limiting me? Is it preventing me from growing? And is it causing me undue harm, or is it causing me undue stress? Is it causing me frustration because I can't go through it? If the answer to those questions is yes, then likely it's a good idea to try to do a controlled immersion and work through that to rise above that fear, and gain some what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of words in the morning, but gain some immunity to it, I guess, and gain some strength, rise above it. And then the second questions you want to ask yourself in these situations is, if I proceed down this, what is the worst case scenario? Start actually doing something like, Tim Ferriss talks about this. He calls it fear setting, where you actually look through and you identify what are the scenarios that exist. What is the worst case scenario that will happen if you proceed down this path? Well, when you think about the skydiving example that I just gave, well, the worst case scenario is you jump, the parachute fails, and you fall plummet to your terrible death, and that's that's not very a compelling thing to me to get over, to be honest. But in many situations, like maybe having the difficult conversation, what is the worst case scenario there? Well, the worst case scenario is maybe you offend the other person, maybe they get upset with you, maybe they get angry. Maybe they lash out, maybe something like that happens. But a lot of times we overemphasize that worst case scenario, and we say, well, they'll probably kill us, or they'll attack us, or something like that. When is that ever the case? Because then when we look at the worst case scenario, we have to ask ourselves, really, is that really going to happen? Is that really the thing that's going to happen? And then we can work our way backwards and ask, well, we can work our way to, well, what is the reward? Skydiving example again. Well, the reward is you get a thrill, and you get to the ground alive, and you say, thank God I'm alive. Well, the way I figure it, I can probably say thank God I'm alive today, no matter what, just being here on terra firma. But there are some things where you can actually get a reward from that. Think about that difficult conversation you might need to have for a second. And so we've identified the worst case scenario that's in your mind. If you, oh my gosh, they're going to attack me, they're going to harm me, or something like that. Well, working backwards, well, what's going to happen in that situation? Is that really the case? And if not, well, what is the reward? What is the potential reward for it? The opposite side of it. Well, you're going to get some closure on whatever you're thinking of. If the person is upset with whatever you have to talk about, then you can work through that forgiveness, and then if you feel like you can, the potential reward can be that you work through it and everything is okay and they appreciate you. And then ask yourself, what is the more likely case scenario out of those? And maybe the likely case scenario falls somewhere in the middle, but overwhelmingly, most of the time, you're going to find that the likely case scenario is going to give you a greater sense of peace when that happens. So again, the two real questions are to ask yourself when you're faced with a fear or a phobia or something that's causing you anxiety or panic, is am I limited by this? By not proceeding and not trying to immerse myself in this fear in a controlled way, am I limiting myself? Am I limited, or is it preventing me from growing? Is it causing me undue harm or stress? And then the second question is, what is the worst case scenario that I'm thinking of, and what are the potential rewards? Once you've identified those, you can approach this in a very controlled way. Perhaps the difficult conversation can be approached in a more loving and compassionate way, or something like that. But using an example from my own life, I remember when I was really unhealthy, when I was in the midst of alcoholism and really succumbing to my anxiety, my problems with anxiety. I remember at one point sitting on the couch and watching the Ironman triathlon for the first time, the Ironman World Championship on television, and my immediate reaction, my immediate feeling was, wow, it would be so cool to do that. So right there, it was a desire. It was something that I wanted to achieve. It immediately invoked this sense of that would be so neat to achieve that. So, just taking a pause there, asking yourself when you see something that excites you, and you immediately have that reaction of, whoa, that's cool. It gives you this sense of, wow, that sounds amazing. That would be great. Really think about that and store that in your brain for a second, because my next thought when I was sitting on the couch watching the Ironman triathlon, right after I experienced that sense of euphoria, wow, that would be so awesome to do that, my brain kicked in and it immediately shut it down and said, I could never do that though. I'm not one of those people. I could never do that. Look at me. I'm overweight. I'm not in shape. I'm drinking too much. I smoke. All of these excuses, my brain telling me all these reasons why I couldn't, and that was just fear. It was the fear and the anxiety telling me that I could never do something like that. Fast forward 10 years later, or however many years later that it was, to the point where I was sober and I had this point of reference of how I was able to achieve something that I never thought I could achieve, which was sobriety. And I challenged myself to really think about that Ironman triathlon again when it came into my brain. And I had a little bit more of an empowered state when I was doing that. Sorry, there's a fly in my face, of course, but so the fly is distracting me now. My apologies. So when that happened, I was able to kind of think through it a little bit more and take those next steps to try to do a controlled immersion into that fear that I had once had. And the way that looked was I didn't immediately say, okay, I'm going to, tomorrow I'm going to jump in the water and swim 2.4 miles and then bike 112 and do all this. No, of course not. That would be like, okay, well, I'm afraid of heights, so I'm just going to jump out of an airplane. That doesn't make sense. That's not controlled. That's going from 1 to 100, and that's not safe, and it only serves to compound our fear. The controlled way of doing that is taking the steps, taking the baby steps, basically looking at it as a staircase, where at the top of the staircase is your ultimate goal, and you want to take each step at a time. So what is that first step that you have from where you're at right now? Right now you're afraid of doing this great thing, and for me I was afraid of doing that Ironman triathlon. So what is the first step? Well, I don't know how to swim, and in the right way. I can paddle around, I can float, but other than that, I'm not a swimmer. So the first step is just getting in the pool and starting to swim laps. The second step, or probably the first step, it was one or the other, was to learn about it. It was to really research it and look into what are the ways in which I can start this thing. And that's another way that you can approach these kinds of fears and do it in a controlled way, is start to learn the productive ways to actually proceed and grow through it. With that difficult conversation that maybe you need to be having. Maybe you can start to research, instead of researching things that make you afraid about that, research some things that might empower you about it. Read some books on it, like for example, read Getting to Yes, which is a great way of a great book about how to communicate in situations that might be uncomfortable, or any other kind of reading that might train you to have those difficult conversations in an empowering and helpful way. Start learning about it, and then start practicing it slowly and in a basic way. For me, it was just jumping in the water, starting to swim 25 yards. Then it was 50. Then it was 100, and so on. It was getting on the bike. It was learning to ride the bike in the handlebars before I got into the aero position. Every progressive step took me up the staircase to conquer each one of those fears and give me a point of reference to how I could achieve something that I didn't think I could, until I got to that point where I actually did the Ironman triathlon. And that's just an example, but it could be that difficult. It could be that difficult conversation. It could be a fear of heights. If ever one day I feel that the fear of heights is limiting me, or I see somebody skydive and it gives me that little jolt of, wow, that would be amazing to do that, then I have to ask myself the question: am I limited by this? Is it preventing me from growing? And can I grow from this experience? And if it does, maybe I take those baby steps. Maybe I start hiking around a higher, a more trail with some altitude on it in a safe way, or maybe I do a bungee jump or something like that before the skydive. Whatever it takes to slowly immerse yourself in that fear so that you gradually get over it. And that, my friends, is how you can turn a fear, something that limits you, something that prevents you from growing, how you can turn that into a superpower. And that's what's amazing about this condition that we have of anxiety, this thing that amplifies our fear, because it's almost amplifies these sensations of things that we probably are being told that we might need to do. As long as it starts with that first tinge of wow, that would be amazing to do that, and as long as we can do it in a safe and controlled way, and as long as it's not something that's going to harm us. So I hope that helps. Think about some of the things that you're afraid of. Think about some of the things that are causing you anxiety or stress, or that you're putting off because you don't want to feel the negative effects. And ask yourself those questions: am I limited by this? Is this preventing me from growing? What is the worst case scenario if I go through with this? And what are the potential rewards? And how can you take the first steps, the first safe steps in immersing yourself into that fear so that you can eventually rise above it. Anyway, have a happy Friday, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.